Tonight, we're going to find the edge of humanity's reach. Not the edge of what we can explore, but the edge of what we can return from. Because there's a difference between going somewhere and being able to come back. You can travel far into space, but at some point, the journey home becomes impossible. The fuel runs out, the distance becomes too great, the years required exceed a human lifetime. That point exists, and tonight we're going to find exactly where it is. By the end of tonight, you're going to know how far humanity could venture into the cosmos while still maintaining the ability to return to Earth. You're going to understand what determines that limit and why crossing it means abandoning any hope of ever seeing home again. Before we get started, if you love exploring the depths of space as much as we do, take a second to like the video or subscribe. It's a simple action, but it helps this channel reach more curious minds like yours. Now, let's begin. First, we need to understand that there isn't just one point of no return. There are several, each defined by different constraints. Fuel limitations that prevent you from carrying enough propellant to turn around. Life support systems that can only keep you alive for so long. Medical limits where your body degrades to the point that it could not safely readapt to Earth's gravity. Communication delays so long that you're psychologically cut off from home. And time dilation effects that let you return to Earth, but not to your own era. Each of these creates its own boundary, and the true point of no return for any mission is whichever boundary you hit first. So let's trace these boundaries outward from Earth, destination by destination, and see where each type of limit kicks in. Let's start close to home. The Moon represents our first successful round trip beyond Earth. Between 1969 and 1972, 12 humans walked on the lunar surface. All of them came home. The distance was about 238,000 miles each way. The journey took 3 days out, a day or two on the surface, 3 days back. Total mission time, about 8 days. This established the first important principle of the point of no return. You need enough fuel, not just to get there, but to get back. The Saturn V rocket was 363 feet tall. About 85% of its mass was fuel. Everything burned in the first few minutes just to escape Earth's gravity and send the tiny command module toward the Moon. The lunar module had its own fuel to descend and ascend from the Moon's surface. The service module had fuel to break out of lunar orbit and return to Earth. Every maneuver was carefully calculated. There was almost no margin for error. Apollo 13 proved this in April 1970. An oxygen tank exploded on the way to the Moon. The crew had to abandon their landing, swing around the Moon using its gravity, and limp back to Earth with limited power and dwindling resources. They barely made it. If they'd been any farther from Earth, they wouldn't have survived. So the Moon taught us that the point of no return is determined partly by fuel. You can only go as far as your fuel reserves allow, with enough margin for emergencies. For the Moon, we're well within that limit. We can go there and return routinely, or at least we could if we still had the rockets. But the Moon is close, only 250,000 miles away, a 3-day journey. What happens when we go farther? Mars is about 34 million miles away at closest approach, 143 times farther than the Moon. The journey takes 6 to 9 months, not 3 days. And here's where the fuel problem becomes brutal. You can't just point a rocket at Mars and fly straight there. Both Earth and Mars are moving in their orbits around the Sun at different speeds. Earth completes one orbit in 365 days. Mars takes 687 days. You have to calculate a transfer orbit that intersects Mars's orbit at exactly the right time. The most fuel-efficient path is called a Hohmann transfer. It's an elliptical orbit that touches Earth's orbit at one end and Mars's orbit at the other. To enter it, you fire your engines to escape Earth's gravity and increase your orbital velocity around the Sun. This puts you on an elliptical path that gradually moves outward. Months later, you reach the point where your orbit intersects Mars's orbit. If you timed everything correctly, Mars is there waiting. You fire your engines again to slow down relative to Mars and enter orbit or land on the surface. That's the outbound journey, 6 to 9 months, depending on the exact trajectory. Now, here's the problem for returning. You can't just turn around and come straight back. You have to wait for Earth and Mars to align favorably again. The planets orbit at different speeds, so the geometry that makes a Hohmann transfer efficient only occurs every 26 months. This is called the synodic period. If you arrive at Mars and want to return immediately, you can't. The launch window isn't open. You have to wait on Mars for 12 to 18 months until the planets line up again. Then you can make the return journey. Another 6 to 9 months. Total mission time is about 2.5 to 3 years minimum. 6 to 9 months out, 12 to 18 months on Mars, 6 to 9 months back. This brings us back to our central question. Can you carry enough fuel for a 3-year round trip? With chemical rockets, the answer is barely. Let's put numbers to it. A spacecraft carrying 3 astronauts plus supplies for 3 years might weigh 50 tons, not including fuel. To send that 50-ton payload from Earth to Mars using a Hohmann transfer requires about another 50 tons of fuel. Your spacecraft at Earth departure weighs 100 tons. Now, to return from Mars, you need fuel for the Mars to Earth, Hohmann transfer. About the same amount, another 50 tons. But that 50 tons of return fuel has to be carried from Earth to Mars on the outbound journey, which means you need additional fuel on the Earth to Mars leg just to accelerate that extra mass. It cascades exponentially. The rocket equation tells us that for every kilogram of payload, you need multiple kilograms of fuel. And fuel itself is payload that needs accelerating. For a Mars round trip carrying all its own return fuel, you'd need hundreds of tons of fuel at Earth departure, far more than any current rocket can launch. The Saturn V, the most powerful rocket ever flown until recently, could send about 45 tons toward Mars. Not enough for a crewed round trip with return fuel. SpaceX's Starship, still in development, is designed to send over 100 tons to Mars. Better, but still not enough if you're carrying return fuel. So this is where Mars becomes a critical test of the point of no return concept. Can we extend our range by refueling at the destination? The answer is yes, if we use Martian resources. Mars has what we need to make rocket fuel. The atmosphere is 95% carbon dioxide. The soil contains water ice, confirmed by multiple rovers and landers. You can use these to produce methane and oxygen through a process called the Sabatier reaction. You take carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and hydrogen, either brought from Earth or extracted from Martian water. Combine them with a nickel catalyst at high temperature and pressure. The reaction produces methane and water. 4 hydrogen molecules plus 1 carbon dioxide molecule yields 1 methane molecule and 2 water molecules. The water can be electrolyzed, split back into hydrogen and oxygen using electricity from solar panels or a nuclear reactor. The oxygen becomes rocket oxidizer. The hydrogen is recycled back into the Sabatier reactor. The methane is your fuel. After months of continuous operation, you accumulate enough methane and oxygen to fill your rocket tanks for the return journey. This is in situ resource utilization, ISRU. Using what's available locally, instead of bringing everything from Earth, it transforms Mars from unreachable to reachable for round trips. But it's not without challenges. You need to land your ISRU equipment on Mars before the crew arrives. Send cargo missions ahead of time with solar arrays or nuclear reactors for power, chemical processing equipment, storage tanks, pumps, and compressors. Land it safely. Set it up, either robotically or with a small advanced crew. Run it for months or years to produce enough fuel. Only then send the main crew, knowing their return fuel is waiting for them when they arrive. This approach cuts the Earth launch mass roughly in half. You still need enormous rockets, but not impossible ones. SpaceX's plan for Mars relies entirely on this. Send Starship cargo missions first, carrying ISRU equipment. They land and begin fuel production. By the time the crewed Starship arrives, the propellant depot is full. The crew explores Mars for a year and a half, then uses the pre-positioned fuel to return to Earth. It's achievable with technology we could build in the next 10 to 20 years. Difficult, expensive, risky, but possible. So Mars represents the current practical limit of the point of no return. We can go there and return, but only if we refuel using local resources. It's conditional, dependent on technology we haven't fully proven yet, but it's within reach. And this establishes an important principle. The point of no return can be extended if you can refuel at the destination. But what determines whether we can go beyond Mars? This is where other limits start to matter. Not just fuel, but time. A round trip to Mars takes 2.5 to 3 years minimum. That's a long time to keep humans alive without resupply from Earth. And this creates another type of point of no return. The life support boundary. The International Space Station has sophisticated environmental control systems. It recycles air and water with impressive efficiency. The Environmental Control and Life Support System, ECLSS, is the heart of the station. Carbon dioxide, exhaled by astronauts, is removed from the air using chemical scrubbers. Some of it is vented to space, but increasingly it's processed through Sabatier reactors that combine it with hydrogen to produce water and methane. The water is recovered. The methane is vented. Water is even more carefully managed. Every drop is precious. Urine is processed through distillation systems that remove contaminants and produce drinkable water. Humidity condensed from the air is collected and purified. Even moisture in exhaled breath is captured. The ISS recycles about 93% of its water. That sounds efficient, and it is compared to earlier spacecraft. But 7% is still lost over time. For a crew of 6, that loss adds up to hundreds of pounds of water per year that needs replacement. The ISS receives regular cargo shipments from Earth every few months. Water, food, spare parts, new equipment. Without these resupply missions, the station crew would run out of consumables within months. For a Mars mission, there is no resupply. You launch from Earth with everything you need or the ability to produce it. Once you're on the way, you're on your own. This means you need closed-loop life support that can operate for 3 years without input from Earth. We don't have that yet. We're developing it, testing components on the ISS, building prototypes, but it's not proven for multi-year operation. The longest any human has spent in space, continuously, is about 14 months. Russian cosmonaut Valery Polyakov on the Mir space station in the mid-1990s, and he was being regularly resupplied the entire time. A Mars mission would push beyond that to 30 months or more. Equipment breaks down, filters clog, pumps fail. Sensors drift out of calibration. On the ISS, when something breaks, you either fix it with spare parts delivered from Earth or wait for the next crew to bring replacements. On a Mars mission, you can't wait for Earth. You need redundant systems, extensive spare parts, and crew members trained to repair anything that might fail. The margin for error is razor thin. A single critical failure in life support could doom the entire mission. So life support creates its own point of no return. Beyond a certain mission duration, we can't reliably keep people alive because our systems aren't robust enough. With current technology, that limit is probably around 3 to 5 years total mission time. Mars at 2.5 to 3 years barely fits within that window. Anything farther requires either better life support or accepting higher risks. And this connects directly to how far we can go. If life support limits us to 5 years total, and travel time to a destination is 2 years each way, we can only spend 1 year at the destination before heading home. That's 4 years total, still within the limit. But if travel time is 3 years each way, that's 6 years just for transit. No time at the destination. Beyond the life support limit. So as destinations get farther, the life support constraint becomes tighter. It's not just about having enough consumables. It's about systems that can operate reliably for years without maintenance from Earth. And we're not there yet. But let's say we solve life support. Better recycling, more reliable equipment, redundant backups for everything. We can keep people alive for 5 years, maybe 10. Does that mean we can reach farther destinations and return? Not necessarily, because there's another limit, the human body itself. In zero gravity or low gravity, your bones lose density, about 1 to 2% per month. After 6 months on the ISS, astronauts lose 6 to 12% of their bone mass. After a year, 12 to 24%. After 3 years on a Mars mission, you could lose 30 to 70% depending on the individual. Your bones become brittle. Standing up in Earth's gravity after that could cause fractures. Your spine might compress under your own weight. Muscles atrophy too. About 20% loss during 6 months in space. Your heart shrinks and weakens. Your cardiovascular system adapts to zero gravity in ways that make returning to gravity dangerous. When you stand up after landing, blood pools in your legs. Your weakened heart can't pump enough to your brain. You faint. Most astronauts recover within weeks or months after returning from 6-month missions. But after years in space, recovery might take much longer or might not happen at all. Some of the bone loss appears to be permanent. Some astronauts never fully regain the density they lost. So, there's a medical point of no return. A duration beyond which your body degrades so much that returning to Earth's gravity becomes life-threatening. We don't know exactly where that point is because no one has tested it. But estimates suggest it's somewhere around 5 to 10 years of total time in space. A Mars mission at 2.5 to 3 years is probably survivable. But you're close to the edge. Anything longer pushes into unknown territory. So now we have 3 overlapping limits for Mars. Fuel, barely achievable with ISRU. Life support, barely achievable with advanced systems. Medical, barely survivable if the mission doesn't run long. Mars sits right at the convergence of all 3 limits. It's the farthest we can go and still return with technology we could build today or in the near future. But what about going farther? What if we had better propulsion? Nuclear rockets have been designed since the 1950s. We know how to build them. They're more efficient than chemical rockets. Nuclear thermal rockets heat propellant using a nuclear reactor instead of chemical combustion. This makes them able to achieve higher speeds with less fuel mass. With nuclear propulsion, you could reach speeds allowing you to arrive at the asteroid belt in 1 to 2 years instead of several. The asteroid belt extends from about 2 AU to 3.3 AU from the Sun. An astronomical unit is Earth's distance from the Sun, 93 million miles. So the belt is about 186 million to 307 million miles away, farther than Mars. Could you go there and return? In theory, yes. If you could refuel at the asteroids. Many asteroids contain water ice. You could mine it, electrolyze it, produce hydrogen and oxygen fuel. But asteroid mining presents unique challenges. Asteroids are small, with almost no gravity. Landing is more like docking than landing. You have to match velocities precisely and gently make contact, or you'll bounce right off into space. In near-zero gravity, normal mining techniques don't work. If you try to drill into an asteroid, the drill pushes you away instead of penetrating the rock. You need to anchor yourself somehow. Harpoons, drills that screw into the surface, nets or cables. Once anchored, you need to extract material. Explosives to fracture rock, grinders to pulverize it, scoops to collect it. All operating in gravity so weak that debris floats away instead of settling. Then you need to process the material. Heat it to melt ice, separate it from rock and dust, purify it, electrolyze it. All this requires equipment, power, and time. Solar panels could provide power, but you're farther from the sun, so they're less efficient. Nuclear reactors would work better, but add mass and complexity. And you need to know which asteroids have what you need. We don't have detailed surveys of most asteroids. Spectroscopic analysis from telescopes gives clues about composition. Some asteroids look metallic, some rocky, some carbonaceous with possible water ice. But you don't know for sure until you get there and sample them. You could travel for months to an asteroid only to find it doesn't have enough water to refuel. Then you're stranded. So asteroid mining extends the theoretical point of no return to the asteroid belt, 3 to 4 AU. But it's conditional on developing technologies we don't have yet. Robotic mining equipment that works in microgravity, autonomous processing systems, detailed surveys to know which asteroids are worth visiting. We're probably decades away from this being practical. Current estimates suggest commercial asteroid mining might begin in the 2030s or 2040s with small-scale robotic operations. Large-scale operations supporting crewed missions are farther off. So for now, the asteroid belt represents a future possibility, not a current capability. The practical point of no return with near-future technology stays at Mars. But let's push farther. What if we had fusion propulsion? Fusion rockets, if we can build them, could reach 10 to 20% of light speed. At those speeds, you could reach Jupiter in 1 to 2 years. Jupiter is about 483 million miles from Earth at closest approach, about 5 AU from the Sun. A 2-year journey is within the range of what life support might handle. And a round trip of 4 to 5 years is close to our medical limits. So fusion propulsion could theoretically make Jupiter reachable, but only if you can refuel there. Jupiter itself is a gas giant, no solid surface, impossible to mine. But Jupiter has moons. 79 known moons, with 4 large ones discovered by Galileo in 1610. Europa is covered in water ice, potentially perfect for refueling. Land on Europa, mine the ice, produce hydrogen and oxygen, fill your tanks, return home. But Europa presents extreme challenges that make Mars look easy. Europa orbits in the middle of Jupiter's radiation belts. Jupiter has the strongest magnetic field of any planet in the solar system, 10 times stronger than Earth's. This field traps charged particles from the solar wind and from volcanic eruptions on Io, another moon. These trapped particles create intense radiation belts. Europa orbits right through them. The radiation level on Europa's surface is about 540 rems per day. For context, a lethal dose for humans is about 450 rems total. On Europa, you'd receive a lethal dose in less than 24 hours without shielding. Any equipment needs massive radiation shielding. Electronics fail quickly without protection. Solar panels degrade rapidly. Humans couldn't work on the surface without extremely heavy shielding that would make movement nearly impossible. You'd need to work from underground shelters or heavily shielded habitats. And the temperature is brutal. Europa's surface averages about -256 degrees Fahrenheit or -160 degrees Celsius. Cold enough to freeze carbon dioxide solid. Metals become brittle, lubricants freeze, batteries lose most of their capacity. Everything has to be designed to function in conditions colder than anywhere on Earth. Mining ice at those temperatures while dealing with lethal radiation is engineering beyond our current capabilities. You'd need nuclear reactors for power because solar panels would be inefficient and would degrade quickly in the radiation. You'd need autonomous robotic equipment because humans can't safely work on the surface for more than brief periods. You'd need months or years to produce enough fuel for a return journey. And during that entire time, you're exposed to radiation, equipment is failing, you're hoping nothing critical breaks that you can't fix. Even if you solved all the technical challenges, a round trip to Jupiter would take 5 to 6 years minimum. 2 years there, 1 to 2 years producing fuel and exploring, 2 years back. That's beyond our current medical limits. After 5 to 6 years in low gravity, your body would be so degraded that returning to Earth might kill you. Bone loss could make your skeleton unable to support your weight. Muscle atrophy could leave you unable to move in Earth's gravity. Cardiovascular weakness could cause your heart to fail when subjected to full gravity again. Radiation exposure over that duration would dramatically increase your cancer risk. You might survive the journey and return to Earth, but the long-term health consequences would be severe, likely leading to cancer or permanent disability. So Jupiter sits at the extreme edge of medical feasibility. It's theoretically possible to get there with fusion propulsion, but the biology is uncertain and extremely risky. 5 to 6 years pushes human physiology to limits we've never tested. We don't know if someone could survive that duration and still return to Earth's gravity. Maybe with perfect countermeasures, artificial gravity, advanced medicine, it's survivable. Maybe not. It's unproven territory where the medical risks and potential for permanent disability are enormous. Unless we develop artificial gravity through rotating spacecraft, or genetic modifications that make humans more resistant to bone loss and radiation, or cybernetic enhancements to replace degraded biological systems. Without those technologies, which don't exist yet, Jupiter represents the outer limit of what might barely be possible. You could potentially go there and potentially come back. But the medical risks are so severe that it's beyond anything we've demonstrated is safe. Beyond Jupiter, we cross into absolute impossibility. The outer planets are even farther. Saturn, at 886 million miles, nearly twice as far as Jupiter. Uranus, at 1.6 billion miles, Neptune at 2.7 billion miles. Round trips to these destinations would take 10 to 20 years or more, even with advanced propulsion. 10 to 20 years in low gravity or zero gravity. At that duration, there's no ambiguity, no uncertainty. Your body would be destroyed beyond any hope of recovery. Let's be specific about what happens to a human body after 10 years in space. Your skeleton, which started as a load-bearing structure capable of supporting your weight, becomes something closer to the bones of a bird. Hollow, fragile, incapable of compression loads. The trabecular bone, the spongy interior that gives bones their strength, degrades first. After 10 years, you might have only 30 to 40% of your original bone mass remaining. Your femur, the thigh bone that carries your full weight when you stand, would snap under normal Earth gravity. Your vertebrae would compress, possibly fusing together or fracturing. Your ribs would break from the simple act of breathing deeply in full gravity. The muscle atrophy is equally severe. Your heart, a muscle that's been pumping blood in zero gravity for a decade, shrinks to perhaps 60% of its original size. It's adapted to an environment where blood doesn't pool in your legs, where pumping to your brain requires minimal effort. Return to Earth, gravity, and suddenly your heart has to work 3 times as hard. Blood pools in your lower body. Your brain doesn't receive enough oxygen. You lose consciousness within seconds of standing. And if you somehow remain conscious, your heart might simply give out from the strain. Cardiac arrest from the sudden demand your weakened heart can't meet. Your leg muscles, unused for a decade except for resistance exercises that can't fully replicate gravity, have atrophied to perhaps 40% of their original mass. You couldn't stand, even if your bones could support you. You couldn't walk. You'd collapse immediately, unable to fight against Earth's pull. Your anti-gravity muscles, the ones that normally keep you upright without conscious thought, no longer function. They've forgotten how. The neural pathways that control balance and posture have degraded. Even with physical therapy, recovery might take years, and some damage might be permanent. Then there's the radiation. A decade in deep space, beyond Earth's protective magnetosphere, exposes you to cosmic rays constantly. High-energy particles slam into your cells, breaking DNA strands. Most of the time, your cells repair the damage, but not always. Sometimes the breaks are repaired incorrectly, creating mutations. After 10 years, you've accumulated enough mutations that cancer is nearly guaranteed. Maybe multiple cancers in different organs, leukemia from damage to bone marrow, brain tumors from particles that penetrated your skull, lung cancer, colon cancer, skin cancer. The latency period for radiation-induced cancer is typically 5 to 20 years, so you might make it back to Earth alive. You might even survive the initial return to gravity with medical support. But 5 years later, the cancers start appearing, one after another. Even with treatment, the cumulative radiation dose is so high that new cancers keep developing. You might get another 5 or 10 years of life. But the radiation has fundamentally damaged your DNA across trillions of cells. Eventually, something critical fails. Your immune system overwhelmed, your organs compromised, your body unable to keep up with the constant cellular damage. This is the absolute medical point of no return. Not risky like Jupiter, not uncertain, but impossible. No biological human could survive 10 to 20 years in space and then return to Earth's gravity. Your body would fail under the strain of re-entry or shortly after landing. Or you'd survive the landing only to face years of progressive disability and cancer. Your body simply could not handle it. So the outer planets represent destinations that are medically unreachable for round trips, not just difficult or risky, but fundamentally impossible for biological humans. These aren't destinations we can visit and return from, not with any foreseeable technology that still uses unmodified biological humans. But what if we modified humans? This is where the conversation shifts from engineering to biology and ethics. We know that some organisms handle radiation better than humans. Tardigrades, microscopic animals, can survive radiation doses thousands of times higher than lethal levels for humans. They have proteins that protect their DNA from radiation damage and repair mechanisms far more efficient than ours. Deinococcus radiodurans, a bacterium, can survive radiation that would kill a human instantly. It has multiple copies of its genome and extraordinarily efficient DNA repair systems. Could we give humans these capabilities? Genetic engineering is advancing rapidly. CRISPR and other gene editing tools let us modify DNA with precision. In theory, we could identify the genes that make tardigrades radiation resistant and insert them into human cells. We could enhance DNA repair mechanisms, add redundant copies of critical genes, boost cellular defenses against cosmic rays. The technology isn't there yet, but it's not science fiction. It's biology we're actively developing for other purposes. Cancer treatment uses similar approaches, enhancing cells' ability to repair damage. Gene therapy for genetic diseases involves inserting or modifying genes. Applying these techniques to make humans space-hardy is a logical extension, but it raises profound questions. If we genetically modify humans for space travel, are they still human? If someone has tardigrade genes, synthetic DNA repair systems, engineered metabolism, are they a new species? And what about their children? If these modifications are heritable, you're creating a population that's genetically distinct from Earth humans. Over generations, the gap could widen. Martian colonists might evolve or be engineered to thrive in low gravity. Asteroid miners might be modified to function better in microgravity. Jovian explorers might have radiation resistance built into their genome. Eventually, you have separate populations that can't interbreed with each other or with Earth humans. Is that acceptable? Some would argue yes. Adaptation to new environments is how evolution works. Humans already vary genetically based on ancestral environments. High-altitude populations have genetic adaptations for thin air. Diving populations have larger spleens for extended breath-holding. Space populations having genetic adaptations for radiation and low gravity is the same principle. Others would argue no, that genetic engineering of humans crosses ethical lines, that creating separate populations risks conflict and discrimination, that we should remain one species, one human family, regardless of where we live. These aren't questions we have to answer today, but they're questions we'll face if we're serious about settling the outer solar system. Because, without genetic modification or radical life extension or artificial gravity, destinations beyond Jupiter are simply unreachable for round-trip journeys by baseline humans. The biology doesn't allow it. The timeline is too long, the conditions too harsh, the damage too severe. So we either accept that limit and focus on the inner solar system, or we change what it means to be human. Neither answer is easy. Both have profound implications for our future. But there's one more limit we haven't discussed yet. The psychological limit. At some distance, you're so far from Earth that communication delays sever your connection to home. Light takes time to travel. At Mars, 3 minutes one way, 6-minute round-trip communication delay. You send a message and wait 6 minutes for a reply. Annoying but manageable. At Jupiter, 43 minutes one way, 86-minute round trip. You send a message in the morning, get a reply in the afternoon. Real-time conversation is impossible. You can't get timely help or advice. You're truly on your own. At Neptune, 4 hours one way, 8-hour round trip. A question sent in the morning gets answered in the evening. Earth feels impossibly distant. And at Alpha Centauri, 4.37 light-years away, the delay is 4.37 years each way, 8.74 years round trip. You send a message and wait nearly 9 years for a response. Everyone on Earth is nearly a decade older by the time they reply. Their circumstances have changed. They might not remember sending the original message. You're not having a conversation. You're sending messages to the future and receiving messages from the past. That psychological isolation is its own point of no return. Beyond a certain distance, maybe Jupiter or Saturn, Earth stops feeling like home. It's too disconnected from your daily life. Too remote to provide any sense of community or support. You're living in your own bubble of time that barely overlaps with Earth's present. For most people, that isolation would be unbearable. So communication delay creates a boundary around 1 to 2 hours of lag. Beyond that, roughly at Jupiter, you're psychologically cut off. You might be able to physically return, but you've already lost your connection to Earth. Now, let's talk about the absolute physical limit, the edge beyond which return is impossible no matter what. That boundary is the heliopause. The heliopause is where the sun's influence ends and interstellar space begins. It's about 123 AU from the sun, roughly 11.4 billion miles. To escape the solar system, you need to reach the sun's escape velocity from wherever you are. From Earth's orbit, that's about 94,000 miles per hour. The Voyager spacecraft achieved this using gravitational assists from Jupiter and Saturn. Voyager 1 crossed the heliopause in August 2012, Voyager 2 in November 2018. They're now in interstellar space, traveling outward, and they'll never return. They've passed the ultimate point of no return. For a crewed spacecraft, escaping the solar system would require enormous fuel, with chemical rockets, barely possible to reach escape velocity. Completely impossible to slow down, turn around, and come back. The fuel requirements would make the spacecraft almost entirely fuel tanks. Even with nuclear or fusion propulsion, returning after leaving the solar system would be extremely difficult. Once you cross the heliopause with enough speed to get there, you're in the interstellar void. No asteroids to mine, no planets to refuel at, nothing but empty space for light years in every direction. You're committed to wherever your trajectory takes you. If you're aimed back toward the sun, you might eventually return, but the journey could take centuries. If you're aimed away, you're gone forever. So the heliopause at 123 AU represents the absolute physical point of no return. Cross it, and you're not coming back with any realistic technology. But what about interstellar space, beyond the solar system? The nearest star, Alpha Centauri, is 4.37 light-years away, 25.7 trillion miles. With current propulsion, the journey would take tens of thousands of years, obviously impossible for a round trip in a human lifetime. But, with advanced fusion or antimatter propulsion reaching 10% of light speed, you could get there in about 44 years. 88 years, round trip. Longer than most human lifespans. But here's where physics offers a strange loophole. Time dilation. Einstein's special relativity shows that time passes differently for observers moving at different speeds. At high velocities approaching light speed, time slows down for the traveler relative to stationary observers. This isn't speculation. It's measured every day in GPS satellites and particle accelerators. At 90% of light speed, time runs at about 44% normal rate for you. A journey to Alpha Centauri at 90% light speed takes about 4.86 years from Earth's perspective. But from your perspective on the ship, only about 2.1 years pass. You could make the round trip in about 4.2 years of your own experience time. Well, within a human lifetime. You could leave at 25, return at about 29. But here's the catch. On Earth, about 9.7 years have passed. Your friends are 35, nearly a decade older than you. Your parents have aged a decade. The world has moved on. That's manageable. You're still in the same generation. But if you go farther, the gap widens. Travel to a star 20 light-years away at 90% light speed. About 20 years of your time. But 44 years pass on Earth. You return at age 45, but everyone you knew is elderly or gone. Your parents are gone. Your friends are in their late 60s. Children born when you left are now middle-aged adults. Travel to a star 100 light-years away at 99% light speed. About 28 years of your time, but 200 years pass on Earth. You return to the year 2226. If you left in 2026, everyone you knew is gone. Not just your friends, but their children and grandchildren. The civilization you left is gone. Languages have evolved. Nations have changed. Technology is unrecognizable. You're a visitor from the past, arriving in a distant future. Let's make this concrete. Imagine you're 25 years old in 2026. You board a spacecraft capable of 99% light speed. Your destination is a star system 100 light-years away. From your perspective, the journey takes about 14 years due to time dilation. You arrive at the distant star at age 39. You spend a few months exploring, collecting data, documenting what you find. Then, you begin the return journey. Another 14 years from your perspective. You return to Earth at age 53. You've aged 28 years. You left as a young adult. You return in early middle age, but Earth has aged 200 years. It's now the year 2226. Your parents, if they were 50 when you left, would be 250 years old. They've been gone for over a century. Your siblings, your friends, everyone you knew, they're all gone too. Their entire lives played out while you were traveling. Their children lived and passed on. Their grandchildren too. The oldest people alive might be the great-great-grandchildren of people who were infants when you left. The world you return to is incomprehensible. In 2026, smartphones and electric cars were cutting edge. Social media dominated communication. Democracy and authoritarianism competed globally. Climate change was an urgent concern. In 2225, who knows what dominates? 200 years ago was 1825. No electricity, no cars, no aircraft, no computers, no antibiotics, no modern medicine. Slavery was legal in much of the world. Women couldn't vote. Monarchy was the dominant government. The gap between 1826 and 2026 is the same gap you're crossing in reverse, except you're jumping forward, not back. In 2226, assuming civilization survived, technology is beyond anything you can imagine. The political structures might be unrecognizable. Nations might have merged or fragmented. New ideologies might have emerged. Earth might be united or fractured. Humanity might have spread throughout the solar system or beyond. Or Earth might have suffered catastrophes, wars, climate collapse, pandemics. The civilization you return to might be smaller, more fragile, struggling to survive. You have no way to know. And even if civilization is thriving, you don't fit. Your language is archaic. You speak English or Mandarin or Spanish from 2026, but languages evolve. After 2 centuries, they might be barely recognizable. Slang has changed completely. Cultural references you make land flat. You mention historical events from your time, and people react like you're talking about ancient history. Because to them, you are. You're literally a historical artifact, a person from 2 centuries ago, impossibly preserved and returned. You have no social connections. No family, no friends, no colleagues. Everyone you could have built relationships with is gone. You'd have to start completely over. Make new friends who see you as a curiosity, a person from the past. Find work in a world where your skills are obsolete. Your education from 2026 might be quaint or useless. The technology you know how to use no longer exists. The cultural knowledge you have is historical trivia. You have property and legal issues. Did you own a home when you left? It's been abandoned for 2 centuries. Someone else probably owns it now. Did you have money in a bank account? The bank might not exist anymore. Even if it does, the currency probably changed. Your dollars or euros or yuan from 2026 might be collector's items, not money. Did you have a job, a career, a professional license? The company closed a century ago. Your credentials are meaningless. You'd need some kind of special status. Maybe society has provisions for relativistic travelers. Legal frameworks to handle property across centuries. Support systems to help temporal exiles integrate. Or maybe not. Maybe you're just a strange person with incredible stories and no place in the modern world. A living museum piece. Studied by historians, interviewed for archives, but fundamentally alone. And here's the cruelest part. You could do it again. You could leave Earth in 2226, travel another 100 light years, return another 200 years later to 2426, age another 28 years, arrive at 71 years old. But Earth would be 400 years beyond your birth. You could keep jumping forward, living a normal human lifespan of travel while watching Earth-age centuries for every few decades you experience. You could visit Earth every 2 centuries, seeing how civilization evolves over millennia. Always a visitor from the past, never belonging to any era. This is immortality of a sort, not biological immortality, but temporal displacement that lets you persist across centuries. But it's a lonely immortality. You don't get to keep anything except yourself. Every time you return, everything and everyone is gone. You're constantly grieving for a world that no longer exists. At some point, you'd probably stop returning. You'd pick a settlement at one of the distant stars and just stay there. Build a new life in a place where everyone is in the same situation. A colony of temporal exiles from different eras, none belonging to the present, all making a future together. So, relativistic travel creates a temporal point of no return. You can physically return to Earth, but you can't return to your own time. For most people, returning to find everyone gone and society transformed is unacceptable. That's its own kind of no return. So the temporal limit is probably around 20 to 50 years of Earth time passing, maybe 10 to 25 light years of distance. You could go there and return to a world still somewhat familiar. Your immediate family might be old or gone, but society would be recognizable. Technology wouldn't be unrecognizable. You could adapt, reintegrate, find your place. Beyond that, you're arriving in a future you don't recognize. A world that's moved on without you. And at that point, return loses its meaning. You came back to Earth, but you didn't come home. Home exists only in the past, and you can't go there. Let's summarize all these boundaries. With current chemical rockets, the point of no return is Mars. About 34 million miles. Reachable and returnable if you can refuel using Martian resources. Beyond Mars, fuel limitations make return impossible without better propulsion. With near-future nuclear propulsion, the point extends to the asteroid belt. About 280 to 370 million miles. Reachable if we can develop asteroid mining for refueling. With advanced fusion propulsion, maybe Jupiter at 483 million miles. But only if we can somehow mine ice from Europa and survive the radiation. Life support limits missions to about 3 to 5 years total duration. That corresponds to destinations maybe 1 or 2 AU away, the inner asteroid belt. Medical limits cap missions at 5 to 10 years before returning to Earth's gravity becomes fatal. That keeps you within the inner to middle solar system. Communication delays create psychological isolation beyond Jupiter. About 5 to 10 AU, roughly 1 to 2 hours of lag. The heliopause at 123 AU is the absolute physical boundary. Leave the solar system and you're not coming back. And temporal displacement from time dilation creates a limit around 20 light years. Beyond that, you return to Earth, but not to your own era. The true point of no return is where these boundaries intersect. For most missions, it's determined by fuel and life support. Mars with current technology. Maybe the asteroid belt with better technology. Possibly Jupiter with fusion propulsion and extreme effort, but not much farther. The solar system is vast, but most of it lies beyond our reach for round trips. We can send probes there, robots that don't need to return. But crewed missions expecting to come home are confined to the inner solar system, perhaps 3 to 5 AU with optimistic assumptions, 10 AU, at most, with technologies we might develop this century. Beyond that, returning becomes impossible. The fuel requirements exceed what we can carry or manufacture. The time requirements exceed what our life support can handle. The medical degradation exceeds what the human body can survive and recover from. The psychological isolation exceeds what most people can tolerate. And if you go far enough, fast enough, the temporal displacement exceeds the lifespan of everyone you knew. These aren't arbitrary restrictions. They're fundamental limits imposed by physics, biology, and human psychology. The speed of light is absolute. The rocket equation is mathematical certainty. Human biology evolved for Earth and struggles elsewhere. And human minds need connection to maintain sanity. Within these constraints, we have a bubble of accessibility. A sphere centered on Earth, extending maybe 3 to 10 AU, depending on technology. Inside that bubble, round trips are possible. We can explore, study, and return home. Outside that bubble, destinations require one-way journeys. You can go there, but you're not coming back. That boundary will shift as technology improves. What's impossible now becomes possible later. 50 years ago, returning from orbit was risky and difficult. Now, it's routine. The moon was once beyond reach. Now we know we can go there and return. Mars is next. Within decades, Mars will transition from barely reachable to routinely accessible for round trips. Eventually, maybe the asteroids. Each generation pushes the boundary outward, but there will always be a boundary, because physics doesn't change. The laws governing fuel, energy, biology, and time are fundamental. We can work within them more cleverly, use them more efficiently, but we can't break them. So, the point of no return will always exist. It will move outward with technological progress. But it will never disappear entirely, and maybe that's not a bad thing. Because understanding the limits helps us appreciate what's possible within them. Mars is reachable. We can go there and come back. That's extraordinary. An entire world, as large as Earth's continents combined, within our reach. Canyons, volcanoes, ice caps, ancient rivers, possible subsurface water, centuries of exploration and discovery waiting. The asteroids might be next. Millions of small worlds, each unique. Some rich in metals, some in water, some in organic compounds. Resources to mine, mysteries to unravel. The moons of the outer planets are even more exotic. Europa, with its subsurface ocean possibly harboring life. Titan, with its lakes of liquid methane and organic chemistry. Enceladus, with geysers of water erupting into space. These are destinations worth reaching, even if we can't easily return. We could send colonists who choose to stay permanently. People willing to make these moons their home, knowing they'll never see Earth again. That's not failure. That's humanity, expanding beyond one world to many, ensuring our survival by spreading across multiple environments. And from those outposts, we explore even farther. A colony on Titan supports missions deeper into the outer system. A base on Europa studies Jupiter in ways impossible from Earth. Each foothold extends our reach. So the point of no return isn't a wall that stops us. It's a threshold. Before it, we're explorers who return home. After it, we're colonists who build new homes. Both are valuable. Both serve the purpose of expanding human presence in the universe. And as we've learned, the point of no return depends on what we mean by return. Returning to Earth physically. Returning to Earth's gravity while still healthy enough to survive it. Returning to the time period we left. Returning to the people we knew. These are different kinds of return, with different limits. You might be able to physically reach Earth, but arrive too degraded to walk in gravity. You might arrive healthy, but find everyone you knew is gone. You might arrive in your own lifetime, but decades have passed, and the world has changed. Each is its own point of no return, and crossing any of them means losing something. Your health, your era, your connections, your home. The choice of which to cross is personal. Some people will stay within the conservative limits, exploring only what they can reach and return from safely. Some will push farther, accepting medical risks to see more distant worlds. Some will cross the ultimate boundary, leaving Earth forever to build new civilizations on other worlds. All of these choices have value. All contribute to human exploration and survival. The point of no return isn't failure. It's just the place where one type of journey ends and another begins. Where visiting becomes living. Where exploration becomes settlement. Where temporary missions become permanent homes. And in understanding where that point lies, we understand both our limits and our possibilities. We're constrained to a bubble around Earth, yes. But that bubble contains worlds worth a lifetime of discovery. We may never reach distant galaxies or cross the universe. But we can reach Mars, touch the asteroids, perhaps visit the moons of giant planets. We can expand beyond Earth, establish footholds throughout our solar system. We can ensure that humanity survives on multiple worlds. And maybe someday, technology will push the boundary farther. Maybe fusion propulsion extends our range. Maybe medical advances let us survive longer in space. Maybe closed-loop life support becomes perfected. Maybe we discover physics we don't yet understand. Each advance moves the point of no return outward, makes the impossible possible, expands our bubble of accessibility. But for now, we know where the edge is: Mars, with current technology; the asteroids with near-future technology; Jupiter, with optimistic assumptions and technologies we might develop this century; the heliopause as the absolute physical limit; and nearby stars with relativistic speeds if we're willing to return to a different time. These boundaries define what we can do. They're not walls to discourage us. They're maps showing us where we can go. And within those maps, there's more than enough to fill generations with wonder. So when you look up at the night sky tonight, remember this: every point of light represents a place. Some you can visit and return from. Some you can visit but never leave. And some you can only dream about. The point of no return is where those possibilities diverge, where the decision to go becomes the decision to stay. And understanding where that point lies is the first step to choosing which side of it you want to be on: explorer or colonist, visitor or resident, someone who goes and comes back, or someone who goes and never returns. Both paths are open. Both lead to discovery. The point of no return simply marks where you have to choose between them. And in that choice lies the future of humanity among the stars. Now, let's examine what it would actually take to push these boundaries outward. Because understanding the engineering challenges shows us not just where the limits are, but why they exist and how we might overcome them. The rocket equation is the fundamental constraint on all space travel. Every kilogram of payload requires multiple kilograms of fuel to accelerate. The faster you want to go, or the more mass you're carrying, the more fuel you need. And fuel itself has mass, which means you need even more fuel to accelerate the fuel. This exponential relationship is why chemical rockets are limited. Hydrogen and oxygen combustion, the most energetic chemical reaction we use for rockets, can only achieve so much velocity. The exhaust velocity, the speed at which hot gas shoots out the rocket nozzle, determines efficiency. For hydrogen-oxygen rockets, exhaust velocity is about 4,500 meters per second. To achieve delta V, change in velocity, you need to burn fuel. The relationship is logarithmic. To double your speed, you need exponentially more fuel. This is why getting to Mars and back is so hard with chemical rockets. Nuclear thermal rockets improve this by using nuclear reactors to heat propellant instead of chemical combustion. The exhaust velocity is higher, maybe 900 meters per second or more. That means you need less propellant mass for the same delta V. But you still face the same fundamental constraint. The rocket equation doesn't go away. It just becomes slightly less punishing. Fusion rockets, if we can build them, could achieve even higher exhaust velocities, maybe tens of thousands of meters per second. That would dramatically improve the mass ratios and extend our range. But fusion propulsion is still theoretical. We've achieved fusion in laboratories and weapons, but never in a controlled, sustained way that produces net energy. Using it to power a rocket is decades away at minimum, possibly a century or more. So the fuel limit isn't going to disappear. It might shift outward with better propulsion, but it will always exist. Because the rocket equation is derived from conservation of momentum, a fundamental law of physics. You can't cheat it. You can only work within it more cleverly. For life support, we're developing better systems, but perfect closure is probably impossible. The ISS recycles 93% of water, which required decades of development and billions of dollars. And it still loses 7% that needs replenishment. Food production in space is even harder. Plant growth experiments on the ISS have successfully grown lettuce, radishes, peppers, and other vegetables. But yields are low, growth is slow, and the equipment required is bulky and energy-intensive. To feed a crew entirely from space-grown food would require massive greenhouses with artificial lighting, carefully controlled atmospheres, and constant maintenance. We've never demonstrated this at scale. The Biosphere 2 experiment in Arizona in the 1990s tried to create a closed ecosystem on Earth. 8 people lived in a sealed 3.14-acre facility for 2 years. It failed to be self-sustaining. Oxygen levels dropped dangerously low due to unexpected microbial activity in the soil. Food production was insufficient, and the crew had to ration carefully and still barely had enough. Psychological stress from isolation and resource scarcity created conflicts. If we can't make it work in a large facility on Earth with natural sunlight and Earth's gravity, making it work in a cramped spacecraft in zero gravity is vastly harder. So, closed-loop bioregenerative life support remains a distant goal. We can support crews for a few years with recycling and stored supplies. But for longer missions, we'd need either perfect closed-loop systems or regular resupply. Since resupply from Earth isn't possible on deep space missions, the life support limit remains real. Maybe we'll improve recycling efficiency from 93 to 98 to 99%. Maybe we'll develop compact high-yield hydroponic or aeroponic food production. But there will always be some losses, some inefficiencies, some need for replacement parts and supplies. That puts a ceiling on mission duration measured in years, not decades. The medical limit is perhaps the most fundamental because it's about biology, not engineering. We can build better rockets and better life support. But we can't easily redesign the human body. Bones evolved to support weight against Earth's gravity. Remove that weight and they atrophy. This isn't a design flaw, it's adaptive. Why maintain dense, heavy bones if you don't need them? In space, lighter bones make sense from an evolutionary perspective, even though they doom you when you return to gravity. We can slow bone loss with exercise, medications, diet. Astronauts on the ISS exercise 2 hours a day on treadmills, resistance machines, and cycling equipment. They take vitamin D and calcium supplements. They use medications that slow osteoclast activity. All of this helps, but it doesn't eliminate bone loss. Even with aggressive countermeasures, astronauts still lose 1 to 2% per month. For longer missions, we'd need better interventions. Maybe drugs that more completely block bone resorption. Maybe artificial gravity through rotating spacecraft. If you spin a spacecraft, centrifugal force simulates gravity. Spin it fast enough, and you could produce 1 g of acceleration at the rim. This would keep bones and muscles loaded, preventing atrophy. But rotating spacecraft have their own challenges. You need a large radius to avoid problems with Coriolis forces, making people dizzy. The larger the spacecraft, the more mass, the more fuel needed to accelerate it. And building a rotating spacecraft is complex engineering we haven't attempted for crewed missions. So, artificial gravity remains theoretical. Possible in principle, difficult in practice, not demonstrated yet. Without it, we're stuck with bone loss and muscle atrophy as inevitable consequences of long-duration spaceflight. And at some point, that degradation crosses a threshold where returning to Earth kills you. We don't know exactly where that threshold is, but it exists. And it likely caps mission duration at somewhere between 5 and 10 years. Beyond that, you're committed to living in low-gravity environments permanently. You can't come home. The radiation limit is similar. Cosmic rays are high-energy particles, mostly protons, created by supernovas and other violent cosmic events. They travel through space at nearly the speed of light. When they hit biological tissue, they cause DNA damage. Most of this damage is repaired by cellular mechanisms. But some escapes repair and can lead to mutations. Accumulated mutations increase cancer risk. On Earth, the atmosphere absorbs most cosmic rays. The few that reach the surface are low energy and relatively harmless. But in space, there's no protection. Cosmic rays hit spacecraft constantly. Shielding helps, but only to a point. Heavy materials like lead absorb particles, but they add mass. And some cosmic rays are so energetic, they punch through any realistic amount of shielding. The only perfect shield would be several meters of solid material, which would make spacecraft impossibly heavy. So astronauts in deep space receive radiation doses hundreds of times higher than on Earth. The dose accumulates over time. Each day adds more exposure, more DNA damage, more cancer risk. At some point, the cumulative dose is so high that developing cancer becomes nearly certain. For a Mars mission, the increased risk is considered acceptable. Maybe a few percentage points higher chance of cancer over a lifetime. For a Jupiter mission, the risk would be much higher, possibly tens of percent. For a decade-long mission to the outer solar system, cancer would be almost inevitable. You might survive the journey and return to Earth, but you'd develop cancer within a few years of returning. That's a point of no return measured in radiation dose. Once you've absorbed too much, you're doomed, even if you make it home. We could potentially mitigate this with drugs that enhance DNA repair or clear damaged cells. Genetic engineering might make humans more resistant to radiation. But these are speculative technologies that don't exist yet. For now, radiation sets a hard limit on how long humans can spend in deep space and still have a reasonable chance of long-term survival after returning. The psychological limit is harder to quantify, but just as real. Humans need social connection. Not just communication, but real-time interaction. Conversation where responses come immediately, where you can read emotional cues, where there's a sense of shared experience. When communication delays stretch to minutes or hours, that connection breaks down. You're sending messages, but not having conversations. You're telling people about experiences, they can't respond to in real time. You're receiving updates about events that happened hours ago and are already resolved. It's isolating in a profound way. Studies of isolated environments on Earth, Antarctic research stations, submarines, remote oil rigs, show consistent psychological effects. Depression, anxiety, interpersonal conflicts, difficulty concentrating. These happen even when communication with the outside world is available. Now, imagine those communication delays aren't seconds or minutes, but hours. Imagine every conversation takes a full day of back and forth. Imagine you can't call someone when you're upset or anxious. You can only send a message and wait hours for comfort that comes too late to help. For most people, this would be unbearable. Some individuals might tolerate it better than others. Highly introverted people, those comfortable with isolation, those focused on the mission above all else. But even they would struggle with years of communication delays. Humans aren't built for that level of isolation. We're social primates who evolved in groups. Our mental health depends on connection. Sever that connection, and psychological harm follows. So the communication delay limit is real, even if it's not as measurable as fuel or radiation. Beyond about 1 to 2 hours of lag, you're asking people to endure isolation that breaks most minds. And finally, the temporal limit from time dilation. This one is unique because it's not about survival, it's about meaning. You can physically survive a relativistic journey to a distant star. Your body makes it through, your spacecraft functions, you return to Earth alive. But the Earth you return to isn't the one you left. Decades or centuries have passed. Everyone you knew is gone. The culture, technology, language, all transformed. You're a historical artifact, a person from the past appearing in the present. For some people, maybe that's acceptable. Maybe the journey itself is reward enough. Maybe the knowledge gained is worth losing your place in time. But for most people, that price is too high. Home isn't just a place, it's a time. The people you know, the culture you understand, the era you belong to. Return to Earth a century later and you don't have a home anymore. You have a planet that looks vaguely familiar but doesn't welcome you because you're alien to it. So the temporal point of no return is wherever you decide the time gap becomes unacceptable. Maybe 10 years is okay. You can adapt to a world a decade older. Maybe 50 years is too much, arriving to find everyone gone. That's personal, different for each individual. But somewhere in that range, there's a threshold where return stops being meaningful. You came back to Earth, but you didn't come home. And that's its own kind of point of no return. All of these limits, fuel, life support, medical, psychological, temporal, they overlap and constrain each other. Together, they define a bubble of accessibility. With current technology, that bubble extends to Mars. We can barely reach it and return, but it's possible. With technologies we might develop in the next few decades, the bubble could extend to the asteroid belt. Nuclear propulsion, asteroid mining, better life support. All of these are plausible within our lifetimes. With very optimistic assumptions about fusion, propulsion, and medical breakthroughs, maybe Jupiter. But that's pushing the envelope of what seems physically possible for biological humans. Beyond Jupiter, the limits compound. Travel time exceeds medical tolerance. Communication delays exceed psychological tolerance. Fuel requirements exceed what even fusion propulsion can reasonably provide. And the outer solar system, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, lies beyond all reasonable hope of round-trip access. These are places we can send probes, robots, perhaps even colonists willing to stay permanently. But not places we can visit and return from. Not with biological humans. Not with any technology we can currently envision. The heliopause at 123 AU is the final physical boundary. Leave the solar system and you're in interstellar space with no resources and no way to return. And the stars beyond, light years distant, are reachable only with time dilation that creates temporal displacement. You can go there and return to Earth, but not to your own time. So the answer to our question, how far can we travel before returning becomes impossible, is complicated. It depends on technology, biology, psychology, and what you mean by returning. Returning to Earth, physically. Returning while still healthy enough to survive Earth's gravity. Returning to your own time and the people you knew. Each has different limits. And the practical point of no return is wherever those limits first become insurmountable. For most missions, that's Mars with current technology. Maybe the asteroid belt with near-future advances. Possibly Jupiter if we solve multiple difficult problems simultaneously. But not much farther than that. The universe is vast, beyond comprehension. Our solar system alone is larger than human intuition can grasp. And most of it lies beyond the point of no return for round-trip missions. But within the bubble we can reach, within that sphere of accessibility, extending a few AU from Earth, there's enough to occupy humanity for centuries. Mars alone could support decades or centuries of exploration. The asteroids number in the millions, each unique. Even the Moon, right next door, still has mysteries we haven't unraveled. We don't need to reach the stars to find wonder in space. Our own neighborhood offers more than enough. And maybe that's the real lesson about the point of no return. It's not a failure or a limitation to be lamented. It's a map showing us where we can go. A guide to what's possible now and what might be possible tomorrow if we develop the right technologies. And within those possibilities, within that bubble of accessibility, there's a future worth reaching for. A future where humanity is no longer confined to one world. Where we have footholds on Mars, in the asteroid belt, perhaps on distant moons. Where the point of no return isn't a barrier, but a threshold separating exploration from settlement. Some destinations we visit and return from, bringing knowledge home. Other destinations we settle permanently, expanding our species across multiple worlds. Both types of journeys have value. Both contribute to human survival and understanding. And the point of no return simply shows us which is which. So the point of no return exists. It's real, constrained by physics and biology. But it's not the end of human ambition. It's the beginning of understanding what we can achieve. And within those limits, there's more than enough to inspire generations. More than enough to ensure our survival. More than enough to answer the ancient question of whether we're alone. The point of no return tells us how far we can go and still come home. And that knowledge, that map of what's possible, is the first step to actually going there. For Mars, we're close. The technology needed exists or is in development. Chemical rockets can get us there. ISRU can provide return fuel. Life support can last 3 years with aggressive recycling. What's missing is the will and the funding. Building the spacecraft, testing the systems, training crews, launching the missions. All of this requires billions of dollars and years of development. But the challenges are specific and solvable. Launch vehicles need to lift 100 to 150 tons to low Earth orbit. SpaceX's Starship is designed for this, though it's still in testing. NASA's SLS can lift similar masses, but costs over $2 billion per launch. Either could work, but cost matters for sustainability. If each Mars mission costs $10 billion, you can only fly a few. If you can cut costs to $1 billion or less, you can fly dozens of missions and build real infrastructure. The spacecraft needs radiation shielding. Water walls are effective, thick layers of water surrounding crew compartments. Water blocks radiation and serves double duty as life support backup. You need several tons of water for effective shielding, but you're already carrying water for drinking and recycling. Design the tanks to surround sleeping quarters, and you get shielding as a side benefit. Life support needs to be highly reliable, with extensive redundancy. 2 independent water recycling systems, so if one fails, the other keeps running. Multiple carbon dioxide scrubbers with different technologies, chemical and mechanical. Backup oxygen generation through water electrolysis powered by solar panels and batteries. Food for 3 years is mostly freeze-dried and vacuum-sealed. Lightweight, stable, nutritionally complete. Maybe supplemented with small hydroponic gardens for fresh vegetables and psychological benefits. Crew selection is critical. You need people who are technically competent across multiple disciplines. A geologist who can also repair electronics. A medical doctor who understands mechanical systems. An engineer who can perform emergency surgery if necessary. Small crews mean everyone needs overlapping skills. And you need people who are psychologically suited for isolation. 3 years with the same 5 or 6 people in a confined space. No privacy, no escape, constant stress. Personality conflicts that would be minor on Earth become major in a spacecraft. Selection processes test for compatibility, stress tolerance, emotional stability. The training takes years. Learning systems, practicing procedures, building team cohesion. By launch day, the crew needs to function as a seamlessly coordinated unit. SpaceX is working on Starship specifically for Mars missions. NASA has plans for Mars exploration in the 2030s. China has announced intentions to send humans to Mars. Multiple nations and private companies see Mars as the next frontier. So Mars is likely within reach in our lifetimes. Maybe in the next 10 to 20 years, the first humans will walk on Mars. And critically, most of them will come home. Mars will transition from impossible to difficult to routine. The point of no return for Mars will move firmly into the accessible category. For the asteroid belt, we need better propulsion and proven mining techniques. Nuclear thermal rockets are technically feasible. We've tested them on the ground. We know the physics works. What's lacking is political will to fly nuclear reactors in space and the investment to build operational systems. The United States tested nuclear thermal rockets in the 1960s and 70s. Project Rover and Nerva, the nuclear engine for rocket vehicle application. They built and tested actual reactors, fired them, measured performance. The engines worked. They achieved exhaust velocities double that of chemical rockets. They were reliable enough for crewed missions. But the program was cancelled in 1972 due to budget cuts and shifting priorities. The Apollo program was winding down. Public interest in space was fading. Nuclear rockets seemed unnecessary. Now, there's renewed interest. NASA's current plans for Mars include nuclear propulsion as an option. Shorter transit times mean less radiation exposure and less time for things to go wrong. 6 months to Mars with chemical rockets becomes 3 to 4 months with nuclear thermal propulsion. That's significant for crew safety and mission success. But actually building and launching nuclear rockets faces obstacles. Environmental concerns about launching radioactive material. If a rocket explodes during launch, you've scattered nuclear material across a wide area. The reactor wouldn't be critical during launch, so you're not creating a nuclear explosion. But you are potentially contaminating the launch site and surrounding regions with radioactive debris. Treaties limiting nuclear weapons in space, though these don't technically prohibit nuclear propulsion. The Outer Space Treaty of 1967 prohibits nuclear weapons in orbit. But nuclear propulsion isn't a weapon. It's a power source and engine. Still, the political optics are challenging. Public perception and political resistance. Many people hear nuclear and think dangerous or bomb. Explaining that a nuclear thermal rocket is safe requires education and transparency. These are solvable problems, but they require decisions and commitments we haven't made yet. If we committed to nuclear propulsion today, we could probably have operational systems in 10 to 20 years. Design the reactor, build it, test it on the ground. Develop launch procedures that minimize risk. Gain regulatory approval and public acceptance. Launch the first missions to demonstrate the technology. That would extend our range to the asteroid belt, cutting travel times and expanding what's reachable for round trips. Asteroid mining is farther off. We need to develop robotic systems that can work in microgravity. Anchoring mechanisms that secure equipment to asteroids with negligible gravity. Harpoons that shoot into the surface and provide tether points. Augers that screw into rock and provide stable platforms. Nets or cables that wrap around small asteroids and allow manipulation. Drilling and extraction tools that work without gravity to hold material in place. Vacuum-compatible drills that don't rely on weight for cutting force. Grinders that pulverize rock without scattering debris everywhere in microgravity. Electromagnetic collectors that use charged fields to gather and hold material. Processing equipment that can handle material in zero gravity. Furnaces that melt and separate metals and ice without relying on convection or settling. Electrostatic separators that use charge differences to sort materials. Centrifuges that use rotation to simulate gravity for processing. Some of this is being developed for lunar mining, which faces similar challenges. The Moon has some gravity, 1/6 of Earth's, but it's still low enough that normal mining doesn't work. Equipment being designed for lunar operations could be adapted for asteroids. Robotic arms, drills, scoops, all need to be tested in low or zero gravity environments. If we prove the technology on the Moon, we could adapt it for asteroids. Companies are already working on this. The economic incentive is there. A single metallic asteroid might contain more platinum group metals than have ever been mined on Earth. Nickel, cobalt, iron, water, all valuable for space industry. What's missing is the initial investment and the proof of concept. Asteroid mining requires identifying targets. We need detailed surveys of asteroid composition. Spectroscopic analysis from Earth gives rough estimates, but you need close-up observations to be certain. Send reconnaissance probes to candidate asteroids, map their surfaces, analyze their composition, confirm they have what you need. That's a multi-year, multi-billion-dollar effort before any actual mining begins. Then you need to develop extraction and processing at scale. Early missions might be small, demonstrating technology and returning samples. Later missions ramp up to industrial scale, extracting tons of material and processing it in space. Establishing depots where mined material is stored and refined. Creating fuel production facilities that turn water ice into hydrogen and oxygen. Once someone demonstrates profitable asteroid mining, others will follow. And once mining infrastructure exists, it becomes a refueling network for deep space missions. Spacecraft, leaving Earth, for the outer system, could stop at asteroid depots to refuel. That pushes the point of no return outward to 3 or 4 AU. Maybe farther, if we establish a network of mining outposts throughout the belt. Imagine a future where dozens of asteroid bases dot the belt, each mining different resources, producing different products. Water ice from one, metals from another, organic compounds from a third. Spacecraft travel between them, trading, refueling, conducting commerce in space. That transforms the asteroid belt from empty space into an economic zone, a frontier for industry and settlement. For Jupiter and beyond, we need fusion, propulsion. And fusion is hard, really hard. We've been trying to achieve controlled fusion for decades. Progress is steady but slow. Fusion is the process that powers stars. Taking light elements, typically isotopes of hydrogen, and smashing them together with enough force that they fuse into heavier elements. The process releases enormous energy, far more than chemical reactions or even fission. In the Sun, hydrogen nuclei fuse into helium at temperatures of 15 million degrees Celsius and pressures 200 billion times Earth's atmosphere. Those conditions crush hydrogen nuclei together, despite their electromagnetic repulsion. On Earth, we can't create the Sun's pressure, so we need even higher temperatures. Over 100 million degrees Celsius. At those temperatures, matter exists as plasma, a fourth state where electrons are stripped from atoms. The plasma has to be contained somehow. It can't touch any physical container because it would instantly cool below fusion temperatures. So we use magnetic fields to confine the plasma. Tokamaks, donut-shaped chambers with powerful magnets, hold the plasma in a specific shape. The plasma circulates around the torus, held away from the walls by magnetic pressure. We've built many tokamaks over the decades, each generation larger and more powerful than the last. The Joint European Torus, JET, achieved brief periods of fusion in the 1990s. But it consumed more energy to maintain the plasma than the fusion reactions released. Net energy loss, not gain. ITER, the International Thermonuclear Experimental Reactor being built in France, might achieve net energy from fusion in the 2030s. The reactor is enormous, 30 meters tall, 30 meters across. It will use superconducting magnets cooled to near absolute zero to contain plasma at 150 million degrees Celsius. The temperature differential is the largest in the known universe in a single location. From near absolute zero in the magnets to hotter than the sun's core in the plasma, separated by meters. If ITER works, it will produce 500 megawatts of fusion power from 50 megawatts of input heating. A 10-fold energy gain. That's the threshold where fusion becomes scientifically viable. But that's a massive ground-based facility, not something you can put on a spacecraft. The entire reactor weighs 23,000 tons. It requires massive infrastructure for cooling, power, fuel handling. A fusion rocket would need to be compact, reliable, and capable of sustained operation for years. We're probably decades away from that at minimum. Maybe a century. The physics allows it. The engineering is extraordinarily difficult. You need a fusion reactor, small enough and light enough to launch. Maybe 100 tons total, including shielding and fuel. It needs to operate continuously for months or years without maintenance. It needs to produce thrust by directing the fusion exhaust in one direction. The exhaust from fusion is mostly high-energy particles and radiation. You'd use magnetic nozzles to direct charged particles, creating thrust. The specific impulse, the measure of rocket efficiency, could be 10 to 100 times higher than chemical rockets. That means you need far less propellant for the same delta V. A fusion rocket could accelerate to 10 or 20% of light speed, with propellant masses comparable to current chemical rockets. That opens up the outer solar system and potentially nearby stars. But we need to actually build one first. Current fusion research focuses on power generation for Earth, not propulsion. Fusion rockets are a secondary application that might become practical decades after fusion power plants. Without fusion, Jupiter remains at the edge of our reach. Barely accessible theoretically, practically beyond us. With fusion, Jupiter becomes possible. Still difficult due to radiation at Europa and the medical limits of 5 to 6 year missions. But possible. So fusion is the key technology that could extend the point of no return from 3 or 4 AU to 5 or 6 AU. That's a significant expansion of accessible space. It doubles or triples the volume of the solar system we can visit and return from. But even with fusion propulsion, Europa remains one of the most challenging environments in the solar system. The radiation is the central problem. Jupiter's magnetic field is 20,000 times stronger than Earth's at the equator. It extends millions of kilometers into space, trapping charged particles in dense belts. Europa orbits at about 670,000 kilometers, or 416,000 miles, from Jupiter, right in the middle of these belts. The trapped particles spiral along magnetic field lines, bouncing between Jupiter's poles. When they encounter Europa, they slam into the surface at high energies. Electrons, protons, heavier ions, all accelerated to near relativistic speeds by Jupiter's magnetic field. The result is a radiation environment unlike anywhere else in the solar system, except perhaps Io, which is even worse. On Europa's surface, you'd receive about 540 REMs per day. A chest X-ray is about 0.1 REMs. A full-body CT scan is about 1 REM. Astronauts on the ISS receive about 50 REMs per year. On Europa, you'd receive that in less than 2 hours. Within 24 hours, you've received a dose that's likely fatal without treatment. Acute radiation syndrome at 540 REMs causes nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, within hours. Bone marrow failure within weeks. Immune system collapse, infections, bleeding. Fatal outcomes within 1 to 2 months, even with medical care. So any work on Europa's surface requires massive shielding. Lead is traditional but heavy. Water is almost as effective and serves multiple purposes. A habitat buried under meters of ice could provide sufficient shielding. Land a module. Use robotic excavators to pile ice on top and around it, creating a bunker. The ice blocks radiation, provides raw material for life support, and can be melted for water. But working outside the shielded habitat is nearly impossible for humans. Even in a heavily shielded spacesuit, you'd accumulate dangerous doses within hours. Rovers and robots need radiation-hardened electronics. Most commercial electronics fail quickly in high radiation. Memory cells flip bits, processors lock up, sensors give false readings. Radiation-hardened components use special designs and materials to resist damage. But they're expensive, heavy, and less capable than commercial equivalents. A rover on Europa might have computing power equivalent to spacecraft from the 1980s or 90s. Enough for basic operations, but limited for complex tasks. The cold is the second problem. Europa's surface averages minus 160 degrees Celsius, or minus 256 degrees Fahrenheit. Metals become brittle at those temperatures. Steel can shatter like glass if struck. Aluminum loses strength. Plastics freeze solid and crack. Lubricants freeze, making mechanical parts seize up. Batteries lose most of their capacity, providing only a fraction of their rated power. Everything has to be specially designed for extreme cold. Heaters to keep equipment above critical temperatures. Insulation to minimize heat loss. Redundancy, because failures are more common in such harsh conditions. Mining ice at minus 160 degrees while dealing with lethal radiation is engineering beyond our current capabilities. You'd need nuclear reactors for power, because solar panels would be inefficient and would degrade quickly in the radiation. At Jupiter's distance, sunlight is 27 times weaker than at Earth. Solar panels would need to be enormous to generate significant power. And the radiation damages solar cells, reducing efficiency over time. Nuclear reactors provide steady power, regardless of distance from the sun or radiation environment. You'd need autonomous robotic equipment because humans can't safely work on the surface for more than brief periods. Robots that can drill into ice, extract it, transport it to processing facilities, all while operating in extreme cold and radiation. You'd need months or years to produce enough fuel for a return journey. Electrolyzing water to produce hydrogen and oxygen takes time and energy. For a large spacecraft, you might need hundreds of tons of propellant. At reasonable production rates, that could take a year or more. And during that entire time, you're exposed to radiation, equipment is failing. You're hoping nothing critical breaks that you can't fix. The mission becomes a race against equipment, degradation, and cumulative radiation exposure. Even if you solved all the technical challenges, a round trip to Jupiter would take 5 to 6 years minimum. 2 years there, 1 to 2 years, producing fuel and exploring, 2 years back. That's beyond our current medical limits. After 5 to 6 years in low gravity, your body would be so degraded that returning to Earth might kill you. Bone loss could make your skeleton unable to support your weight. Muscle atrophy could leave you unable to move in Earth's gravity. Cardiovascular weakness could cause your heart to fail when subjected to full gravity again. Radiation exposure over that duration would dramatically increase your cancer risk. You might survive the journey and return to Earth, but the long-term health consequences would be severe, likely leading to cancer or permanent disability. So Jupiter sits at the extreme edge of medical feasibility. It's theoretically possible to get there with fusion propulsion, but the biology is uncertain and extremely risky. 5 to 6 years pushes human physiology to limits we've never tested. We don't know if someone could survive that duration and still return to Earth's gravity. Maybe with perfect countermeasures, artificial gravity, advanced medicine, it's survivable. Maybe not. It's unproven territory where the medical risks and potential for permanent disability are enormous. Unless we develop artificial gravity through rotating spacecraft. A spacecraft that spins creates centrifugal force that mimics gravity. At 1 revolution per minute, a radius of 890 feet creates 1 g at the rim. That's larger than any spacecraft we've built, but not impossibly large. Imagine a cylinder, 890 feet in diameter, spinning slowly. The crew lives in modules at the rim, experiencing Earth normal gravity. This prevents bone loss, maintains muscle mass, keeps the cardiovascular system functional. But building such a structure is complex engineering we haven't attempted for crewed missions. The spacecraft needs structural strength to withstand the rotational forces. The spin has to be perfectly balanced, or the spacecraft wobbles. Docking with a spinning spacecraft is difficult, requiring precise timing and coordination. Coriolis forces from the rotation make movement feel weird, potentially causing nausea. And the spacecraft has to maintain its spin for years without degradation. Bearings or magnetic levitation systems holding the rotating section. Power systems keeping everything running. All in the harsh environment of deep space. Or genetic modifications that make humans more resistant to bone loss and radiation. Or cybernetic enhancements to replace degraded biological systems. Artificial bones that don't lose density in zero gravity. Synthetic muscles that don't atrophy. Enhanced organs that resist radiation damage. Augmented immune systems that fight cancer more effectively. These technologies don't exist yet, but they're areas of active research for other purposes. Medical implants, prosthetics, gene therapy for diseases. Applying them to make humans space-hardy is an extension. Without those technologies, Jupiter represents the outer limit of what might barely be possible. You could potentially go there and potentially come back. But the medical risks are so severe that it's beyond anything we've demonstrated is safe. It's the edge of the bubble. The farthest point where return is theoretically possible, but practically uncertain. Beyond Jupiter lies the realm of permanent departure. For the medical limits, we need better countermeasures. Medications that prevent bone loss more effectively. Perhaps drugs that target osteoclast activity specifically without side effects. Artificial gravity through rotating spacecraft, which requires solving engineering challenges of building large spinning structures. Better radiation shielding, possibly using materials found in space like lunar or asteroid regolith. Water or ice can be effective radiation shields if you have enough of it. A spacecraft with thick water walls would protect crew from cosmic rays. If you can mine ice at asteroids or moons, you could manufacture shielding locally, instead of launching it from Earth. Genetic engineering might eventually make humans more resistant to radiation and bone loss. Designer genes that enhance DNA repair, maintain bone density in zero gravity, resist muscle atrophy. This is speculative and raises ethical questions, but it's technically possible. If we're serious about long-duration deep space missions, we might need to adapt humans to space rather than just adapting space to humans. For the psychological limits, we need better support systems. Virtual reality to create a sense of space and connection. AI companions that can engage in real-time conversation when Earth is too far for timely communication. Improved crew selection and training to identify people who can tolerate isolation. Larger crews to provide social interaction among team members. Bigger spacecraft with more room to move around and avoid cabin fever. These are all achievable with current or near-future technology. They don't eliminate the psychological challenges, but they make them more manageable. And for the temporal limits of relativistic travel, there's no technological solution. Time dilation is a fundamental consequence of relativity. You can't avoid it at high speeds. The only mitigation is accepting it. Choosing crew members who are willing to return to a future they won't recognize. Perhaps people with no strong ties to the present, willing to sacrifice their place in time for the sake of exploration. Or crews who plan to settle wherever they go rather than returning. The temporal point of no return might actually be where exploration transitions to colonization. If returning means arriving in a future where you don't belong, why return? Why not just settle at the destination and make it your new home? This is the logic that would drive interstellar colonization. Not round-trip exploration, but one-way settlement. Generation ships carrying families who will live their entire lives in transit, their descendants arriving at the destination. Sleeper ships with cryogenic freezing to survive the journey without aging. Embryo ships carrying frozen embryos and artificial wombs to create the first generation at the destination. All of these are one-way trips. None of them solve the problem of returning to your own time. They just accept that return isn't the goal. The goal is expansion, spreading humanity across multiple star systems to ensure survival even if Earth is destroyed. So the different points of no return call for different approaches. Mars requires commitment and funding, but no new physics. We can do it with existing technology if we choose to. The asteroid belt requires nuclear propulsion and mining technology. Challenging but achievable within decades. Jupiter requires fusion, propulsion, and major medical advances. Difficult and probably a century away, but not impossible. Beyond Jupiter requires either abandoning biological humans in favor of uploaded minds or robots, or accepting one-way trips and permanent settlement. And interstellar space requires accepting temporal displacement. Return trips are possible with time dilation, but you don't return to your own era. Each boundary has its own characteristics and its own solutions. And understanding this helps us plan realistically. We don't need to solve all problems at once. We can push outward incrementally. First Mars, with current technology. Then, the asteroids, as we develop nuclear propulsion and mining. Then, Jupiter, if we achieve fusion and solve medical challenges. Each step expands the bubble of accessibility. Each success makes the next goal more achievable. And eventually, maybe centuries from now, We have a network of settlements throughout the inner and middle solar system. Mars colonies, producing fuel and food locally. Asteroid bases, mining resources, and serving as waypoints. Stations orbiting Jupiter, studying the giant planet and its fascinating moons. Each location extending our reach a little farther. Each population adapted to local conditions, perhaps eventually diverging from Earth humans. Martians who grow up in low gravity and can't return to Earth. Asteroid miners who spend their lives in microgravity. Jovian scientists studying radiation-resistant organisms in Europa's ocean. These would be new branches of humanity, still connected to Earth by communication and trade, but increasingly independent. And that's how we overcome the point of no return. Not by eliminating it, but by accepting it. By recognizing that some journeys are one way. By sending people willing to stay and build, rather than explore and return. The point of no return stops being a limit and becomes a threshold. The place where visiting becomes living. Where temporary becomes permanent. Where Earth stops being home and somewhere else becomes home instead. This is how humanity becomes a multi-world species. Not by conquering the point of no return, but by embracing it. By understanding that expansion requires commitment. That reaching for the stars means letting go of Earth. And in letting go, we ensure survival. Because a species confined to one world is vulnerable to extinction from asteroid impacts, climate change, nuclear war, pandemics. But a species spread across multiple worlds survives even if one world is destroyed. The point of no return protects us by forcing us to diversify. It says you can visit and return, or you can settle and stay. Choose one. And in making that choice, we create redundancy. Multiple populations on multiple worlds, each adapting to local conditions, each developing unique cultures and technologies, all still human, but increasingly different. And that diversity is strength. It means no single catastrophe can destroy us all. It means experiments that fail on one world don't doom all of humanity. It means new ideas can be tried in different environments with different constraints. The point of no return, understood this way, isn't a limitation. It's a catalyst for expansion and diversification. It forces us to commit, to take risks, to build rather than just visit. And, in building, we create something lasting. Something that outlives any individual mission or any individual generation. A human presence throughout the solar system and eventually beyond. That's the vision, enabled by understanding the point of no return. Not as a barrier, but as a map. A guide showing us where we can go with different levels of commitment. Visit Mars and return, achievable now or soon. Settle Mars permanently requires greater commitment but offers greater rewards. Visit the asteroids and return requires better technology but possible within decades. Settle the asteroids creates a resource network for the solar system. Visit Jupiter, barely possible, and requires accepting medical risks. Settle Jupiter's moons, establishes presence in the outer solar system. Reach for the stars, requires accepting temporal displacement or one-way journeys. Each option has its costs and benefits. Each serves different purposes. Understanding them helps us choose wisely. And choosing wisely means we expand sustainably, building on each success to reach farther. So the point of no return isn't the end of the conversation about space exploration. It's the beginning. It frames the questions we need to ask. How far can we go and return with current technology? How far could we go with better technology? What technologies do we need to develop? What are we willing to sacrifice to go farther? These questions guide research priorities, funding decisions, mission planning. They help us separate realistic goals from fantasy. They show us the path forward, step by step. And that path leads outward. From Earth to the Moon, already proven. From the Moon to Mars, within reach. From Mars to the asteroids, requires development, but achievable. From the asteroids to the outer moons, requires breakthroughs, but not impossible. From the outer moons to the stars, requires commitment to one-way journeys. Each step builds on the previous one. Each success makes the next goal more feasible. And eventually, humanity is no longer a single planet species. We're a solar system species with footholds throughout our local neighborhood. And maybe, someday, an interstellar species with colonies orbiting other stars. All of this starts with understanding the point of no return. Where it is, why it exists, how it might shift. That understanding is the foundation for everything else. For mission planning, technology development, policy decisions, crew selection, public support. All of it depends on knowing realistically how far we can go. And now, you know. The point of no return with current technology is Mars, barely achievable for round trips with ISRU. With near-future technology, the asteroid belt at 3 to 4 AU requires nuclear propulsion and mining. With optimistic assumptions, Jupiter at 5 AU requires fusion and medical advances. Beyond that, biology and psychology impose limits that make round trips impractical or impossible. The heliopause at 123 AU is the absolute physical boundary for our solar system, and the stars beyond are reachable only with temporal displacement that separates you from your own time. These are the boundaries. Real, measurable, constrained by physics and biology. They define what's possible and what's not. But they also show us the path forward. They map the territory we can explore and settle. And, in following that map, we chart the future of humanity among the worlds. A future where the point of no return isn't failure. It's just another threshold to cross on our way outward. Another boundary to understand and work within. Another step in our endless expansion into the cosmos. Because that's what humans do. We explore, we push boundaries, we go farther than anyone thought possible. The point of no return doesn't stop us. It just shows us where we need to make commitments, where visiting transitions to living, where temporary missions become permanent homes. And in making those commitments, we ensure our survival and expand our knowledge. We become more than we were. We reach for more than seemed possible. We prove that the point of no return isn't an ending. It's a beginning,